Something is moving in the Atlantic, and nobody is watching it. The Greenland crisis exploded into headlines, territorial threats, military posturing, diplomatic breakdowns. Everyone focused on the politics, on the maps, on who controls what piece of frozen land. But while the world watches the theater, the logistics are breaking. The routes are closing. And the physical gold market is starting to seize up in ways that the spot price doesn't show. Because Greenland isn't just geology, it's geography. It sits at the center of the North Atlantic shipping corridor. The route that moves physical gold from Canadian refineries to European vaults, from London to New York, from the mines to the markets. And that route just became contested territory. Let me show you what happens when the highway shuts down, but the spot price pretends the highway is still open. Most people think of gold as a digital asset, a number on a screen. You click buy, you get exposure. You click sell, you get dollars. Clean, simple, abstract. But behind that number is a physical supply chain that spans continents. Gold bars don't teleport. They move on ships, through shipping lanes, across borders. And every one of those movements depends on routes that are considered safe, insurable, and predictable. The North Atlantic Corridor is one of those routes. It is the highway that connects the Western Hemisphere as gold production to the Eastern Hemisphere as gold demand. Canadian gold goes to Switzerland for refining. South African gold goes to London for vaulting. American gold goes to Frankfurt for sovereign storage. All of it moves through the Greenland Corridor, the Greenland-Iceland Gap, the Denmark Strait, the Arctic shipping lanes that run along Greenland's eastern coast. These routes have been stable for decades, uncontested, routine. The insurance companies price them as low risk. The logistics companies run them on autopilot. The gold moves smoothly, predictably, cheaply. But Greenland just stopped being stable. The moment Trump made his demand, the moment Denmark pushed back, the moment military threats entered the conversation, the insurance actuaries started running new models. They started asking new questions. What happens if the US imposes sanctions on Denmark? What happens if Denmark restricts access to Danish territorial waters? What happens if NATO fractures and the security guarantee in the North Atlantic evaporates? These aren't hypothetical questions anymore. They're risk calculations. And risk calculations change insurance premiums. And insurance premiums change shipping costs. And shipping costs change the delivered price of physical gold. And that delivered price is starting to rise, quietly, without headlines. But rising. Here's the first signal. In the last 2 weeks, multiple sources in the physical gold logistics industry have reported that insurance quotes for North Atlantic gold shipments have increased by 15 to 20%. Not because of piracy, not because of weather, because of geopolitical risk. 15 to 20%, that might not sound catastrophic. But in a market where margins are razor thin and logistics are optimized to the penny, a 15% increase in insurance costs is a seismic shift. It means the route is no longer considered routine. It's now considered risky, and risky routes get priced differently. But here's the problem. That 15% increase in shipping costs doesn't show up in the spot price. Because the spot price is set in London and New York by paper contracts that don't care about shipping. The spot price assumes that gold is fungible and accessible. It assumes that if you want physical delivery, you can get it at spot plus a tiny premium. But that assumption is breaking. Because the premium isn't tiny anymore, and it's not uniform. If you're trying to move gold from Canada to Europe right now, you're paying a significantly higher premium than you were 3 weeks ago. Not because gold is scarce, but because moving it has become expensive and uncertain. This is how physical markets start to disconnect from paper markets, not with a bang, with a slow grinding increase in costs that nobody notices until it's too late. Let me show you how this plays out in the real world. Let's say you're a European bank and you need to take delivery of 100 kilograms of gold from a Canadian mint. A standard transaction. Happens every week. 3 weeks ago, the process was simple. You place the order. The mint refines the bars. They load them onto an insured transport. The transport flies, or ships through the North Atlantic Corridor. The gold arrives in Zurich or London. Total cost, spot price, plus a 2% premium for logistics and insurance. Today, you place the same order. The mint refines the bars. But when they call the logistics company, the quote comes back different. The insurance premium has spiked. The shipping company wants to use a longer, safer route that avoids contested waters. The timeline has stretched from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And the total cost? Spot price plus a 5% premium. 5%. That's the new cost of certainty. But it gets worse, because the logistics companies aren't just raising prices. They're starting to refuse certain routes entirely. We're hearing reports that some insurers are now classifying North Atlantic gold shipments as elevated risk and requiring additional security measures, armed escorts, satellite tracking, redundant transport routes. All of this adds cost. All of this adds time. and none of it shows up in the spot price. So you have a market where the screen says gold is trading at $2,600 per ounce. But if you actually want to take delivery of that gold and move it across the Atlantic, the real cost is $2,730 or $2,750 or higher, depending on the route and the timing. That gap is the fracture, and it's widening. Now let's talk about what happens when the fracture becomes a break. Because right now we're in the early stage. The costs are rising, but the system is still functioning. Gold is still moving. It's just moving slower and more expensively. But what happens if Greenland escalates? What happens if the diplomatic standoff turns into something harder? What happens if Denmark, in retaliation, starts restricting access to the Denmark Strait? The insurance companies will stop writing policies, not because they don't want the business, but because they can't price the risk. When you can't price the risk, you can't insure it. And when you can't insure it, the gold doesn't move. At that point, the physical market doesn't just disconnect from the paper market, it freezes. You'll have gold sitting in vaults in Toronto that can't be delivered to buyers in Zurich. Not because it doesn't exist, but because the route is uninsurable. And when the physical market freezes, the paper market keeps trading. Contracts keep settling, the spot price keeps updating. But the spot price becomes meaningless because you can't get the metal at that price. You can't get the metal at any price because it's not moving. This is the scenario that the physical buyers are starting to front run. And we're seeing the signals in the buying patterns. Over the last 10 days, there's been a noticeable uptick in vault storage requests in North America. Specifically, requests for allocated storage in Canadian and American vaults from European buyers. This is unusual. Normally, European buyers store their gold in Europe. London, Zurich, Frankfurt. That's where the infrastructure is. That's where the liquidity is. But now they're asking to store it in North America. Why? Because they're worried that if they need to move gold across the Atlantic in the future, they won't be able to. So they're pre-positioning. They're moving the gold now while the routes are still open, so they don't have to move it later when the routes might be closed. This is front-running a logistics collapse. And it's not just the Europeans. We're also seeing reports that certain North American institutions are pulling gold out of European storage and repatriating it, not because they don't trust the European vaults, but because they don't trust the shipping lanes. This is the invisible repositioning. The gold isn't leaving the market. It's just being moved to different locations based on geopolitical risk assessments. But that movement creates friction. It creates delays. It creates cost. And all of that friction eventually shows up in the premium. Now, let's look at the second order effects. Because the Greenland corridor doesn't just move gold, it moves other precious metals. It moves silver, it moves platinum, it moves palladium. All of them use the same shipping routes. All of them use the same insurance policies. All of them are facing the same cost increases. But the impact isn't uniform. Gold is the most liquid and the most financialized. It has the deepest market and the most alternative routes. If the North Atlantic corridor becomes too expensive, gold can be rerouted through other channels. It can go south through the Caribbean. It can go west through the Pacific. The options exist. But silver? Silver is bulkier, heavier, less valuable per unit of weight. The shipping costs are already a larger percentage of the total value. If you add another 15 or 20% to the insurance and logistics, the economics of moving silver across the Atlantic start to break. It becomes cheaper to just buy local supply, even if the local supply is more expensive per ounce. This is how regional price dislocations happen. You end up with silver trading at one price in North America and a different price in Europe because the arbitrage mechanism, the ability to move metal from the cheap market to the expensive market, becomes too costly to execute. We're not there yet, but we're moving in that direction. And the Greenland crisis is accelerating the timeline. Here's the mechanism. Right now, the global gold and silver markets operate on the assumption of fungibility. An ounce in New York is worth the same as an ounce in London because you can move it between the two markets efficiently. The arbitrage traders keep the prices in sync, but fungibility depends on movement. If you can't move the metal, it stops being fungible. An ounce in New York becomes worth more than an ounce in London if the buyers in New York can't access the London supply. The markets fragment. And once the markets fragment, the paper price loses its authority because the paper price is set in centralized exchanges that assume global liquidity. But if the liquidity is regional, if the metal is trapped in specific geographies, then the paper price becomes irrelevant to the people who actually need the metal. They have to pay the local physical price. And the local physical price is whatever the seller demands. Because there's no alternative. There's no arbitrage. The metal is here or it's not. And if it's not, you pay a premium to get it. Or you don't get it at all. This is the endgame scenario. And the Greenland crisis is the catalyst that's pushing us toward it. Now let's talk about the sovereign buyers. Because the physical gold market isn't just industrial users and private investors. It's central banks, it's sovereign wealth funds, it's national treasuries. And they're watching Greenland very closely. Because Greenland just proved something they've suspected for a long time. Resource nationalism is back, strategic assets are being weaponized, and in that environment, holding gold in someone else's vault, in someone else's country, is a liability. This is why we're seeing the repatriation trend accelerate. Countries that stored their gold in New York or London for decades are now quietly asking for it back. Not because they don't trust the vaults, but because they don't trust the routes. They don't trust that in a crisis, they'll be able to access their gold. Greenland validates that fear. If the US is willing to threaten a NATO ally over strategic resources, what happens to the gold stored in US vaults when the next crisis hits? Does it stay accessible, or does it become a bargaining chip? The sovereign buyers are asking these questions, and they're answering them by moving metal, repatriating it, storing it domestically, taking physical possession, and every ton of gold that gets repatriated is a ton that leaves the fungible global pool. It's a ton that can't be leased, can't be hypothecated, can't be used to settle paper contracts. It becomes deadweight in the global liquidity system. This is the silent drain. And it's accelerating because of Greenland. Here's the part that nobody is talking about. The drain doesn't have to be dramatic to be devastating. The global gold market operates on a fractional reserve model. The total amount of paper claims on gold far exceeds the amount of physical gold available for delivery. This works because most claims never convert to physical. They settle in cash, they roll forward, they disappear. But if even a small percentage of those claims start demanding physical delivery, the system breaks. There isn't enough gold to go around. The vaults run dry, the premiums explode, and the paper price becomes a joke. Greenland is causing that small percentage to grow, because Greenland is a reminder that physical matters, that geography matters, that logistics matter. And when logistics break, the paper promises become worthless. So where does this go? What happens next? In the short term, the paper market will keep functioning. The spot price will trade normally. Contracts will settle. The COMEX and the LBMA will continue operating as if nothing has changed. But underneath, the physical market will keep tightening. The premiums will keep rising. The delivery times will keep extending. The repatriation requests will keep coming. And at some point, someone is going to place an order that can't be filled. A sovereign wealth fund is going to demand physical delivery of 1,000 tons, and the vault is going to say, we don't have it. We can't get it. The routes are closed. The insurance won't cover it. We'll settle in cash. And the moment that happens, the illusion shatters. Because if one vault can't deliver, why would anyone trust that the other vaults can? If the physical market is frozen, why does the paper price matter? What are you actually buying when you buy a gold contract if the gold can't be delivered? Those are the questions that break the system. And Greenland is setting up the conditions for those questions to be asked. Let me give you the timeline. We're probably looking at a 3 to 6 month window before the cracks become visible. Right now, the market is absorbing the cost increases. The buyers are paying the higher premiums. The logistics companies are finding workarounds. But if Greenland escalates, if the diplomatic standoff hardens into something more permanent, the workarounds stop working. The costs don't just rise, they spike. And the insurance market seizes up. When that happens, the physical premium doesn't increase by 5%, it increases by 50%, or it becomes unavailable at any price, and that's when the paper market loses control. Because you can't trade a contract on an asset that can't be delivered. Or you can, but the price becomes meaningless. It's just a number on a screen with no connection to physical reality. The spot price will say gold is worth $2,600, but if you want physical delivery across the Atlantic, the real price will be $3,000, or $3,200, or whatever the seller demands. This is the bifurcation, the split between paper and physical. And it doesn't happen slowly. It happens overnight. One day the markets are linked, the next day they're not. Greenland is the stress test. It's revealing the fragility of a system that everyone assumed was robust. The assumption was that gold is global, that it moves freely, that the spot price reflects reality. But Greenland is proving that gold is only as global as the shipping lanes are stable, and the shipping lanes just became unstable. The logistics companies know this. The insurance actuaries know this. The sovereign buyers know this. The physical traders know this. The only entities that don't know this are the ones staring at the spot price. Because the spot price is a lagging indicator. It reflects what happened yesterday, not what's happening tomorrow. And what's happening tomorrow is a slow, grinding closure of the roots that make the global gold market possible. You're watching the early stages of a market fragmentation, a breakdown in the assumption of fungibility, a return to regionalized pricing based on who has the metal and who can move it. Greenland didn't create this fragility, it revealed it. The system was always vulnerable to logistics disruption. We just didn't have a catalyst to expose it. Now we do. And the question isn't whether the fracture will widen. The question is how fast, and whether the spot price will catch up before the physical market freezes entirely. Because once the physical market freezes, the spot price becomes irrelevant. It's just a number floating in the void, disconnected from reality. reflecting nothing. The gold exists. It's sitting in vaults. But if it can't move, it might as well not exist. And if it can't move, the price is whatever the person holding it says it is. That's the world Greenland is pushing us toward. A world where physical location matters more than spot price, where regional premiums become the norm, where the global market fragments into isolated pools of liquidity. The paper traders will keep trading. The contracts will keep settling. But the physical buyers will be living in a different reality, a reality where the metal is here or it's not. And if it's not, you can't get it at any price. The Greenland crisis isn't just about territory. It's about access, control, movement. And in a commodity market, if you can't move the commodity, you don't have a market. You have a standoff. And standoffs don't resolve with spot prices. They resolve with whoever holds the metal when the music stops.